Hello everyone and welcome back to another composition review. A couple weeks ago we released our recreation of the Breath of the Wild 2017 trailer. It is a very interesting piece of music, very well composed. I found this in my pile of sheet music and I figured, well, we have to explore it. It's Zelda. Zelda's amazing. So we released the recreation a couple weeks ago. We're going to go through the composition today. We're going to explore some of the more general overviews of it, and probably the next video we release, because this will be probably a two-parter, we will explore the more in-depth harmonic movements. We'll get into some of the runs, some of the melodic development, and so on and so forth. This piece of music was composed for a trailer. Now, writing music to picture is a little bit different than writing it just, oh, I want to write a song. It's a lot different than that because in a lot of cases, you want the music to match up with what is happening in the video. And a lot of the times, there's either two ways that this will be done. Either the composer will be asked to write a piece of music that fits with the overall theme of the movie or the game, or the overarching story, the plot, or the composer will be given the final video cut and asked to write specifically to that. Now, the first way I find is a lot less limiting to composers because you're not locked into writing specifically for what's on screen. The film editors or the video editors or the animators will be asked to animate to the song because the song fits the overall theme of the piece of media, and it will be put together that way. In the second version, the composer is locked into, okay, I have to write this music to fit exactly what's happening on screen. It has to be a certain tempo. It has to be certain time signatures at certain points to make sure that certain events in your music locks with what is happening on screen. But that is another topic for another time. I've gotten way off topic. We're going to listen to the piece. I have it up on another video real quick, but we're going to listen to the piece, and as we're listening to it, we'll go through sort of what's happening, the movements. As you can see up top here, we've got a whole bunch of tempo modulation, and I have some independent song markers here, which I'll just minimize and get out of the way. We also have some time signature changes at the very beginning here, and that kind of has to do with the whole locking to video thing. But we'll just listen to it here, and we'll see what's going on. So I've pulled up the MIDI here. This only includes tonal instruments, such as the tubular bells, the strings, the brass, etc. It does not include the non-tonal instruments, such as just your regular drums or your snares. We will be exploring those later on. As you can see at the very beginning here, we've got this big E note at the bottom. So the song is in the key of G major, so it's got the F sharp up here. As you can see, it has some other sharps playing around in here. It's got a D sharp or an E flat. Throughout the song, you will see some other sort of small modular changes, which we'll explore as we get there, but the overall arching theme of the song is in a G. This is very interesting because it starts off with this really big E hit at the bottom with the piano. And as you can see, it starts off with this really big doomy sort of E hit at the bottom, just boom, with the piano and harps, and then it kind of goes into this more whimsical feeling as well with the high violins and the flutes and the oboes to come in later, as well as the harps and the pianos. It really gives that sort of fantasy feeling that you would expect from a Zelda piece. Now, as you heard there, it has got some little flourishes in the harp and the piano, and it also goes into 5/4 time there for a second for two bars here, as you can see by these time signature changes, and then it goes back into 4/4. This could probably have been because it had to be synced to a film, or it would have been put in to sort of draw it out a little bit longer, emphasize the emotion of it. You can hear we don't really sort of have any sort of rhythmic movements yet. It's just sort of minor melodic changes, some bits of harmony put in. As you can see here, there's no really definite sort of triad chord happening. There's some sevenths and ninths going on. Over here, we've got an E, G, and a B. And then over here, we've got a D sharp and an F sharp paired up with two Bs. And down here, we've still got those E's ringing out until all the way over here. So there's really sort of no set in stone sort of harmonic movement yet, no sort of 1-5-4 chord progression. We're just sort of emphasizing the emotion by playing the relations between independent notes. And then back over here, we're back into 4/4 time as we're getting ready to go into the main section over here. So that is the very, very large up and atom part of the song. As you can see over here, when that happens, we have a huge tempo jump. Now this looks really, really huge, but really all it's doing is going into double time. As you can see, it goes from 58 to 126. It's basically just doubling in speed. This is just an easier way for it to be written out sheet music wise. It also just helps writing wise. You don't have to worry about putting in a whole bunch of really, really small notes, such as like 32nds and 64ths. You can just put in 8ths and 16ths instead. Now, when that oboe came in earlier, when you heard it over here, along with the high strings, it can be thought of as one of our first themes. Of course, it's written for a trailer, so there's not really going to be any sort of highly repeated overarching theme, as you heard when we played through the piece last couple weeks ago. However, this theme is repeated over here. It goes E, B, A, and over here you can see E, B, A, and it has F sharp. So it's keeping the same sort of note progression, but it's adding in different harmonies. And it's really helping emphasize the emotion of the piece before the main sort of heavy hitting part of the trailer happens, before all the action jumps in. We're still in that little emotional down phase, and it really helps give you that Zelda theme because it's emphasizing that oboe for this section. I've always thought of the Zelda pieces as having a very, very big emphasis on sort of the woodwinds, because they give you that more fantasy feel when the woodwinds are paired with strings and they move in cohesion. It really, really gives you that high fantasy feel, and it just sounds amazing as well. Immediately, the way that this is written changes. It goes from being really, really long notes with melodic expression and high amounts of emotion, and it jumps into this really, really heavy hitting trailer section with really fast ostinato strings or run strings, and it's got a whole bunch of rhythmic string hits happening as well. It completely changes tone, as you can hear when we transition over. Now, the song is in the key of G major, but the way it is written out, you could also say it is in E minor. In fact, I would emphasize that even more, because we started out with this big doomy E at the back, and then we move into these big runs where you can see we've got E's and B's, which are the first and fifth note of the E minor scale, and it's also a power chord for your first chord in the scale as well. So it really, really drives into this really powerful rhythmic section where it drives this out and emphasizes that, oh, we're ramping up. then, interestingly enough, it completely loses all sort of power. It's like, okay, ramping up, stuff is happening, and then it goes into this really, really slow piano section with these really, really large, sustained out sort of jazz chords. They don't really have any sort of set in stone triad. We go E, B, and then we have F sharp, G, B, D, E, F sharp, G, A, B, and then D. And then we have this seventh chord here, and even more accentuation in sort of the lower arpeggiated chords. So it goes from really, really heavy hitting to back down to really soft, and then it builds up to really, really heavy hitting again with these ostinato patterns in the woodwinds and strings, as well as these really big brass hits down here, as well as these brass chords over here. And now we start to see some more standard sort of triad progressions with B, D, F, and then a E, G, B, and then an F, A, C chord in their inversions, as well as these melodic movements up above. And the melody for this section is very interesting because it's not really a one-path melody. It's not a one-voice melody. You have this sort of counter melody in the bottom, and then this overarching melody up top in the higher register. And this note change from E to D is accentuated in a lot of other places here. We have E to D here, and then very similarly we have E to C here, as well as E up to B. You have this really, really big chord here, which is an F, A, C chord, and then you have G, D, G, D, G, lots of G's and D's, and it's alongside this F, A, C chord, so it really turns into a 9 chord or an 11 chord, if you will, with all of these really large sort of wall chords. It's playing a lot of just really large, just huge jazz chords. And it goes from that, again, to an almost empty sort of looking harmonic progression where you have all these notes in the bottom register and these brass sort of melodic line in the middle range with these ostinato runs in the strings and woods. And then we transition into what I would say would be the main melodic theme of the trailer piece, which is this section over here where we see all this note movement. And we transition into that from, again, these really, really big chord movements, B, D, F, but as you can see, the D's been sharpened, so it's no longer just your traditional B minor. It is now, in fact, a B major chord, and they do some sort of modal borrowing there to make that just sound beautifully amazing. You can't make a more beautiful chord progression, I think. It sounds happy, but it also sounds sort of impending doom. Stuff is bad, and we still have these ostinato patterns happening which drive this section forward. You can hear them in the background, but you don't really notice them that I would say that this is like the main melodic section because we have a lot of melodic movement accompanied with those snare drums you hear in the background. It almost sounds militaristic with it being focused more on the winds and strings and the certain harmony that they picked out to drive their melodic progression forward. It doesn't have that militaristic feel just because the snares are in there. As you can see, they kind of follow a sense of pravade, of that melodic development strategy, where you have a presentation of a theme, you have a repetition of the theme, you have a variation of the theme, and then you have a destruction of the theme. The destruction doesn't happen until all the way over here, but as you can see, we've got some repetition here. We start off with this E to the F to the D to the G, and then over here E, F, D, G, and then C, B, A, C, B, A. This would be your presentation, and this would be your repetition. Over here you have your variation. When they add in the higher octaves, they make it sound just completely different. They have this big run into it, and then they have this huge destruction where they keep the rhythm, but the thing your ears are trained to expect, the up, down, up, down, up, down, from the E, F, D, G, C, B, A, etc., is destroyed, because you instead go into this descending line, D, C, B, A, G, and F sharp. And it sounds really, really amazing, because when you put it all together, it sounds like this. And when they jump into that variation section where they bring in all the higher octaves, they also bring in more accentuated lower notes. They have the double bass playing over here, but they also bring in the lower brass, the trombones, and the tubas over here. And you can see they're sort of just doing octave runs. And they start out with this bass line that goes C, A, B, and then they repeat it over here for even more of that presentation repetition. And then they just destroy it alongside with the major melodic destruction, where they include all these big chords with the choirs and the brass. Then they do that transition back to a really, really soft sort of piano section like they did all the way back here, where we had this happening. Except now it is different. So once again, it goes from this really, really heavy hitting section with this big, big movements. As you can see, we have really huge chords happening here right at the end with choir, brass, strings, winds, the whole kit and caboodle put into one section. And then we die down to just the piano with some very, very melodically interesting runs. As you can see, we've got more of that pravade, that presentation, repetition, variation and destruction, because it starts down here with sort of this double note and then walk up, and then it has double note walk up, and it keeps this theme similarly up here, and it has a variation of it here until it just destroys it with these really, really big chords and goes into this next section. And then it goes into another really heavy section, but it's not as harmonically condensed as our previous section where we had that sort of main melodic theme. Instead, we've got more ostinatos. I wouldn't call them ostinatos because they're not like multiple notes. I'd say it's more just like a pedal note of your dominant note, your E. And then you have this sort of bass line down on the bottom that's also sort of like a melody played with the double bass and the brass. So we've got that huge section to explore, and as you can see, there's a bit of variation to it. All this can be thought of as being like the same section, but as you can see, it's all drastically different. This section over here has those pedal notes happening that really keep you in suspense. There's not a lot of movement happening because it's all just pedal notes. It's all just flute, oboe, and violin and viola pedal notes just happening for 8 straight bars with this small run at the end. And then you have this sort of brass melody at the bottom, which is repeated over here. And once again, we see that Pravade, presentation, repetition, variation, destruction theme happening, where you have your presentation, I would call it, right here, and then a sort of repetition, and then a destruction. And it varies as well because they bring in the big harmony with your harmonic choir, with your SATB, which is playing all these big notes. And then you also have these woodwind runs and these harp runs and these really big chords, these EGB chords, FAB, ADF, whatever you want to call it, DFA, sorry. And then it goes into this really quiet section with the piano again, which is a reoccurring theme where it goes from a big section to a small section. This is a very good idea for writing trailer music, because if you go from really big to really small over and over, you keep interest with your listeners. You don't have, oh, it's constantly big and bombastic, or oh, it's constantly quiet, and then all of a sudden it's really loud at the end for no reason. You keep interest because you're changing the themes. So it goes into this really small 2-bar just piano section with this run at the end before we really hit into the big of it. Now, if we look at just the overall composition for just one moment, you'll see that if you're just looking at the note density, or the amount of notes that are in any individual section, you can see that the composer left the biggest section for the last, because this is trailer music and you want the biggest part to always be at the end when it's getting really just intense. You're showcasing all of the major plot points, and and you have all these fancy visuals happening and these big attack sequences, etc. He really went all out in this last section, whereas even in the other earlier bigger sections, such as here or here, you don't really have as much note density, and he's really flushed out the harmony here to include the full harmonic spectrum. So you go from this one movement here to the small piano movement, and then you get into this really big movement for the end. And then it dies out, and there's the end of your trailer. As you can hear, there's no sort of like locked in melodic theme throughout this entire piece that we've explored so far. We have what I would say is like the main melodic theme that is expressed back here, where you have this progression here. But over here it also has this very strong melodic movement that doesn't sound out of place and is easily recognizable. And it's played in the piano here. And if I were to just solo the piano, you could hear that all of this is very easily fitting into the same piece. Now, of course, I can't go into like the super in-depth sort of harmonic development. This piece is very heavy on the piano and the winds and the strings. I would say that the brass in it is just sort of more to accent the more heavy scenes and heavy parts such as this end here. I would highly recommend downloading the MIDI that I have linked below to explore this piece on your own. There's only so much that you can explain in a video and a breakdown of a piece, even if I do 2 parts, such as I will be with this one. So I highly recommend downloading the MIDI below, just exploring it for yourself. There's nothing in this world that can teach you better than just analyzing the pieces written by other composers, because they will give you an insight to new writing styles, new ideas, and it'll just sort of help develop your own specific style. So we're probably just going to leave it there for now. We will be doing another video next week for a sort of more in-depth sort of harmonic breakdown. However, it is a very interesting piece in just the way it develops, its overall sort of harmonic development, its melodic development, and as I showed you earlier, it has like some of these weird tempo changes that help push the song forward. However, none of it really sounds out of place, and you never really hear any sort of intense rhythmic changes that are out of place or jump out at you. So we will be exploring some of that a little bit more in next week's video, but for now we're going to leave that there. I hope you guys found this at least a little bit educational. I encourage you to download the MIDI that I will have linked below, and I will see you guys next week. Bye-bye.